Majin being fined $100,000, not for breaking the law, not for causing chaos, but simply for wearing a cross around your neck. Sounds insane, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi. But instead of backing down, she fired back in a way that left the entire courtroom and the judge completely humiliated. This is the story the media didn't want you to hear. And trust me, you're going to want to see how it ends. It was supposed to be just another routine court appearance. Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of Florida, a woman respected for her strong values, unwavering commitment to justice, and a lifetime of public service, walked into the courtroom with confidence. Like many times before, she wore a simple, elegant cross around her neck, a small symbol of her personal faith. To Bondi, it wasn't a political statement, and it certainly wasn't meant to offend anyone. It was simply who she was. But on that particular day, things would take a shocking and bizarre turn. As Bondi entered the room, everything changed. Before the proceedings could even begin, the judge suddenly paused. In front of everyone, lawyers, reporters, and onlookers, he called out Pam Bondi directly. With a stern, almost scolding voice, he pointed to her cross necklace and said it was inappropriate for a courtroom setting. He claimed it could be seen as potentially offensive to others present. The room fell awkwardly silent. You could feel the tension thick in the air. Pam Bondi stood there, stunned but composed. She listened respectfully, never raising her voice, never causing a scene. When the judge ordered her to remove her necklace immediately, Bondi firmly but politely refused. She explained that her cross wasn't a fashion statement or a political weapon. It was a part of her identity, a deeply personal symbol of her faith, and more importantly, her right to wear it was protected under the United States Constitution, the very document that the courts were supposed to uphold. You could have heard a pin drop, but the judge wasn't interested in hearing arguments about constitutional rights. Without much discussion, without considering the bigger picture, he made a decision that would send shockwaves far beyond that courtroom. In front of everyone, he announced that Pam Bondi would be fined $100,000 for her violation of courtroom decorum. Yes, you heard that right. A six-figure fine, all because she wore a small cross around her neck. The courtroom gasped. Some people looked around in disbelief, as if asking each other, did that really just happen? Reporters quickly scribbled notes and grabbed their phones. Within minutes, news alerts were flying across the country. Pam Bondi, fined for wearing cross in court. Religious freedom under attack. Shocking courtroom incident sparks outrage. Social media exploded with hashtags, furious posts and viral videos. Thousands of Americans, Christian or not, couldn't believe what they were hearing. Was this really happening in the United States of America? A country founded on religious freedom and individual rights, where simply wearing a cross could now cost you $100,000. The story grew bigger by the minute. Cable news anchors debated it on live TV. Legal experts called it a violation of fundamental rights. Religious leaders from across denominations spoke out. Ordinary Americans, people who didn't even know Pam Bondi personally, rallied behind her, recognizing that if it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi remained calm. She didn't lash out. She didn't throw accusations. Instead, she stood tall, unwavering, dignified, and more determined than ever to fight back. The stage was now set for a battle that would go far beyond the courtroom. A battle not just for one woman's right to wear her faith, but for the very heart of freedom in America. And trust me, what Pam Bondi did next left the entire legal system scrambling, and the judge looking absolutely ridiculous. Almost instantly, the backlash was huge. The moment news broke that Pam Bondi had been fined $100,000 simply for wearing a cross, the floodgates opened. People from all walks of life, Christians, Jews, Muslims, atheists, conservatives, liberals, young and old, united in outrage, because deep down, everyone knew This wasn't just about a cross. It was about freedom, the very freedom America was built on, being trampled for no good reason. Social media exploded like wildfire. On Twitter, hashtags like #Stand with Pam and #Religious Freedom began trending. On Facebook, videos of angry Americans calling out the injustice went viral, gathering millions of views in hours. YouTubers, bloggers, and influencers from across the political spectrum weighed in. And they all asked the same simple, chilling question. Since when did wearing a cross become illegal in America? Mainstream news channels couldn't ignore the uproar. Commentators on major networks described the incident as an attack on basic freedoms and a dangerous precedent we cannot allow. Even those who didn't always agree with Pam Bondi politically admitted this was wrong, deeply wrong. Legal experts began to pore over the details of the case. One by one, constitutional scholars, former judges, and high-profile attorneys came forward, calling the fine outrageous, reckless, and completely unconstitutional. They pointed out that the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution guarantees two things very clearly: freedom of religion and freedom of expression. Bondi's simple act of wearing a cross violated neither law nor courtroom decorum. It simply expressed who she was. In small towns and big cities alike, people began holding rallies and prayer vigils in support of Pam Bondi. It didn't matter if they were religious or not. Americans understood instinctively that this wasn't just her fight anymore. It had become everyone's fight. Pam Bondi's name was suddenly everywhere. Newspapers dubbed her the new face of standing strong for religious freedom. Editorials praised her courage for refusing to back down under unbelievable pressure. Radio hosts called her a modern-day warrior, defending the rights of every American to believe or not believe without fear of punishment. But through all the noise, Pam Bondi remained calm. She didn't rush to the media to vent her anger. She didn't launch wild attacks on the judge or the court system. She didn't need to. Instead, Bondi did something much smarter and much more powerful. She had a plan, a clear, strategic plan. Rather than treating herself as the victim, she decided to become the voice for millions of Americans who felt their freedoms slipping away little by little every day. She wasn't just going to protest the fine. She was going to challenge it head-on, legally, publicly, and unapologetically. Pam Bondi knew that if she won, it wouldn't just erase a $100,000 penalty. It would send a message loud and clear. Freedom of faith is not negotiable in America. While the media swirled and the public rallied behind her, Bondi and her team quietly began building a case that would not only overturn the ridiculous fine, but would also expose how dangerously close America was getting to forgetting the very rights that made it great in the first place. And as you'll see next, when Bondi finally made her move, it wasn't just the courtroom that felt the shock. It was the entire nation. Instead of quietly paying the $100,000 fine and disappearing from the spotlight, Pam Bondi did the exact opposite. And what she did next shook the entire nation. She decided to fight back, and not just for herself. She was determined to stand up for everyone whose freedoms were being slowly chipped away without them even realizing it. Pam Bondi filed a bold appeal, but it wasn't just a legal move to reverse her own fine. It was a challenge to the entire idea that government officials could punish someone for quietly living their faith. This was no longer about a single courtroom. This was about protecting the very freedoms that millions of Americans take for granted every single day. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters, Bondi stepped up to a microphone and delivered a fiery, passionate statement that instantly went viral. She looked straight into the cameras and said, "I will not apologize for my faith. I will not hide it. And I certainly will not pay a penny for living by the very freedoms this country was founded on." The crowd erupted. It was raw. It was powerful. It was real. And it was exactly what millions of Americans needed to hear at that moment. Behind the scenes, Bondi's legal team sprang into action. They built a rock-solid argument centered on the First Amendment, the foundation of American democracy. They pointed out that freedom of religion and freedom of expression aren't just polite suggestions, they're guaranteed rights. Rights that no judge, no courtroom, and no government official had the power to take away. And here's where the story got even better. Pam Bondi didn't just defend herself. She used her case as a national spotlight to expose a much bigger problem: the quiet but growing attack on religious symbols, personal expressions of faith, and individual freedoms happening all across America. In interviews, speeches, and court filings, Bondi highlighted how wearing a cross, saying a prayer, or even mentioning your faith in public had become controversial, and sometimes even punished, in a country founded on religious liberty. And the people heard her loud and clear. As the story grew, support poured in from all corners of the country. It wasn't just conservatives rallying behind her. Moderates, independents, even many liberals who didn't share Bondi's politics stood with her. Even people who admitted they weren't religious at all said the same thing. This isn't about religion. This is about freedom. Because deep down, Americans understand that if the government can silence one person's beliefs, they can silence anyone's. And if today it's a cross, tomorrow it could be anything else: a political opinion, a cultural tradition, or a personal truth. Pam Bondi had sparked something bigger than anyone could have predicted. Her stand was no longer just about one necklace. It had become a rallying cry for millions who believed that the principles America was founded on were worth fighting for and defending at all costs. And while the courtroom battles raged on, one thing was already clear. Pam Bondi had already won the hearts of everyday Americans who were tired of watching their freedoms be treated like they didn't matter. But the best part, the real victory, and the complete collapse of the judge's case was still to come. Stay tuned, because what happened next left the entire system scrambling to cover its tracks. When Pam Bondi's appeal reached a higher court, everything changed. And it happened fast. The appeals court didn't waste any time. After reviewing the facts, the judges were stunned by what they saw. They weren't just critical of the $100,000 fine. They were absolutely outraged by it. In a sharp, scathing decision, the appeals court completely overturned the fine against Pam Bondi. But they didn't stop there. They went even further, delivering a public rebuke that sent shockwaves through the entire legal community. The appeals court called the original judge's actions a clear violation of constitutional rights and labeled his ruling an embarrassment to the judicial system. Yes, their words were that strong. They made it crystal clear: no American should ever be punished for quietly expressing their faith, especially not inside a courtroom, the very place where justice is supposed to be blind. The judge who had fined Pam Bondi? He didn't just lose the case, he became a national joke almost overnight. Late-night comedians tore into him, turning his decision into the punchline of brutal jokes. Internet memes popped up everywhere, showing the judge with captions like, "When you forget the First Amendment exists," and "Judge 0, Constitution 1. It didn't stop there. Serious voices in the legal world, retired judges, constitutional scholars, and even civil rights groups began calling for the judge to step down or be formally disciplined, because if a judge could hand out a $100,000 punishment over a cross necklace, what other rights might he be willing to ignore? News outlets that had initially tried to downplay the story now had no choice but to cover the judge's humiliation. Headlines read, "Appeals Court slams anti-religious ruling. Pam Bondi victory sends shockwaves through judicial system. Judge faces backlash over religious freedom. Violation." It was clear to everyone, Pam Bondi didn't just win her case. She had exposed a dangerous weakness in the justice system, and she forced the nation to confront it. And while the judge scrambled to defend himself, Pam Bondi stood tall. She didn't gloat. She didn't rub the defeat in anyone's face. She stayed true to the calm, powerful resolve she had shown from day one. When asked by reporters how she felt after the victory, she simply said, "This was never about me. It was about standing up for what's right, for everyone. Faith, freedom, and the Constitution aren't negotiable. They never will be." That quiet strength spoke louder than any victory speech ever could. Pam Bondi had done more than defend her own right to wear a cross. She had reminded an entire country that truth matters, that freedom matters, and that when you stand firm, even when the world seems stacked against you, the truth will always back you up. Her case became a symbol of what's possible when ordinary citizens refuse to be bullied, silenced, or intimidated into hiding what they believe. And in the end, it wasn't Pam Bondi who was embarrassed. It was the system that tried and failed to break her. In the end, Pam Bondi's cross wasn't just a necklace. It became something far greater, a symbol of courage, of conviction, and of the American spirit refusing to bow down. Pam Bondi showed the world that standing up for your rights isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. When faced with intimidation, she didn't waver. When confronted with injustice, she didn't hide. And when given the chance to quietly walk away, she stood even taller. Because freedom isn't something you ask permission for. In the end, Pam Bondi's cross wasn't just a necklace. It became something far greater, a symbol of courage, of conviction, and of the American spirit refusing to bow down. Pam Bondi showed the world that standing up for your rights isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. When faced with intimidation, she didn't waver. When confronted with injustice, she didn't hide. And when given the chance to quietly walk away, she stood even taller, because freedom isn't something you ask permission for. It's something you defend, no matter the cost. Thanks to her bravery, millions of Americans were reminded of a truth that's easy to forget in today's world. Freedom of expression and freedom of religion are not negotiable. They are essential. They are the very foundation of who we are as a people. And what's even more powerful, Pam's story proves that it doesn't take a crowd to spark change. It only takes one person with the courage to say, "No, I will not back down." When one person stands tall, it inspires others to do the same. That's how real change happens. Not through anger, not through violence, but through strength, faith, and unshakable belief in doing what's right, even when it's hard. Pam Bondi turned what was supposed to be a humiliating fine into a national wake-up call. And she did it with grace, strength, and a whole lot of faith. Her story is a reminder for all of us. No matter who you are, no matter what you believe, never let anyone bully you into hiding your values, your faith, or your truth. Because at the end of the day, your rights only survive if you're willing to defend them. Moral of the story: when you stand firm in your beliefs, you don't just protect yourself. You protect freedom for everyone. Never underestimate the power of one voice standing for what's right. And if you believe that stories like this need to be heard, if you believe in standing strong for freedom, faith, and truth, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. We're building a community here of people who believe that courage matters, people who believe that truth still has a place in the world, people who refuse to stay silent. So don't just watch, join us. Subscribe, like, and share this video to keep the spirit of freedom alive. Because when the world tries to tell you to sit down, be quiet, and hide who you are, we'll be right here reminding you to stand tall, speak loud, and never ever back down. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay strong, stay free, and stay true.